It usually starts with a joke, a loud comment, a raised voice that assumes the room will automatically fall silent. When some Americans cross into Canada, they expect politeness, softness, maybe even submission. What they don't expect is that quiet confidence doesn't mean weakness. And when that misunderstanding turns into bullying, the outcome is almost never what they imagine. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. Because Canada has a reputation. Friendly, apologetic, calm. The kind of place where people hold doors open and say sorry even when it's not their fault. To outsiders, especially those used to louder social dominance, that politeness can look like an invitation to push boundaries. And that's where things begin to go very wrong. Many of these stories happen in everyday places. Airports, bars, hockey arenas, border towns, spaces where cultures overlap and assumptions collide. An American tourist raises their voice at a Canadian service worker, convinced that volume equals authority. Someone mocks the accent, the flag, the idea of Canada itself. It's often framed as humor, but the tone is sharp, dismissive, meant to establish superiority. At first, Canadians usually respond the way they're known for: calm voices, short replies, polite deflection. And that calmness becomes the bully's biggest mistake, because Canadians don't escalate quickly. They assess, they observe, they wait, and when they respond, it's rarely with noise. It's with precision. One common scenario plays out in bars, especially near the border or in major cities. An American visitor starts bragging, louder than everyone else, making jokes about Canada being basically America Light, questioning why anyone would choose to live there, pushing drinks onto people who didn't ask, laughing when no one joins in. The room notices. Canadians notice everything, but instead of confrontation, there's silence. A pause. The bully mistakes that pause for approval. Then comes the shift. Someone calmly responds with a fact that cuts through the ego. Something about healthcare. Something about safety. Something about education or quality of life. It's delivered without anger, without insults, just confidence. The room changes. The laughter stops. Suddenly, the loudest person sounds insecure. And that's when the bully realizes they've lost control of the room. What surprises Americans the most isn't aggression. It's how quickly Canadians can dismantle arrogance without raising their voice. There's no chest puffing, no threats, just a collective refusal to be impressed. And for someone used to dominance through volume, that's deeply unsettling. Another common flashpoint is hockey. Americans unfamiliar with how deeply hockey runs through Canadian identity sometimes treat it like a joke. Trash talk turns personal. Insults turn national. Someone crosses a line thinking it's just sports banter. But in Canada, hockey isn't just a game. It's culture, it's history, it's pride passed down through generations. When someone disrespects that without understanding it, the response is swift and organized. Not violent, not chaotic, just firm. Security shows up. Staff intervene. Locals close ranks. The bully is isolated, not attacked, but removed. And that removal hits harder than any argument. Being escorted out while everyone else stays behind is a humbling experience. Airports and border crossings are another place where this misunderstanding plays out. Some Americans arrive expecting special treatment, complaining loudly, talking down to officers, treating the process like an inconvenience rather than a privilege. That attitude does not go far in Canada. Canadian border officers are polite, but they are precise. Every word matters. Every attitude is noted. And when someone tries to bully their way through, the system responds not with emotion, but with procedure. Suddenly, the person who thought they were in charge is pulled aside. Questions become detailed. Time slows down. Missed connections happen. And there's nothing to argue with because everything being done is completely by the book. Many Americans later admit this was the moment it clicked. Canada doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. How can I say this Saturday afternoon? The rules are enforced quietly, and that quiet enforcement is absolute. There are also viral moments captured on phones. Americans shouting in public spaces, expecting someone to shout back. Instead, Canadians film calmly. They let the behavior speak for itself. And once that video hits the internet, the response is brutal. Not from Canadians alone, but from everyone. Comment sections fill with disbelief. People point out the entitlement, the disrespect, the lack of awareness. The bully doesn't just lose the argument, they lose their reputation. Their employer sometimes notices. Their family notices. The internet doesn't forget. That's the disaster most bullies never anticipate. It's not a fight, it's exposure. What makes these situations fascinating is that Canadians aren't trying to win. They're not trying to dominate. They're simply refusing to be diminished. And that refusal, delivered calmly and collectively, is incredibly effective. Americans who witness this often describe it as unsettling. There's no dramatic climax, no explosion, just a slow realization that the power dynamic they expected doesn't exist here. Some Americans learn from it, they adjust. And Canadians, true to their reputation, often accept those apologies without holding grudges. Respect is restored. Everyone moves on. Others double down. They get louder, more aggressive. And that's when the consequences escalate further. Not emotionally, but structurally. Removed from venues, denied service, asked to leave, sometimes banned. And through it all, the Canadians remain calm. That calmness is not weakness. It's confidence built on stability, on systems that work, on a culture that doesn't need to prove itself constantly. By the end of these encounters, the original bully often looks confused, embarrassed, smaller than when they arrived. Not because someone overpowered them, but because no one played the game they were trying to start. And that's the real lesson behind these stories. When Americans try to bully Canadians, they're not stepping into a passive environment. They're stepping into a culture that values respect, self-assurance, and quiet authority. A culture that doesn't respond to noise, but with consequences. So when it ends in disaster, it's not sudden, it's slow, inevitable, and entirely avoidable. If you've ever witnessed a moment where arrogance completely backfired, or if you've experienced culture shock crossing borders, share your story in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into unexpected cultural clashes and the moments that reveal who really holds the power, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned. Because sometimes, the loudest person in the room is the one with the least control. What really shocks Americans after these encounters isn't just the outcome, it's how consistent it is. No matter the city, the setting, or the situation, the pattern stays the same. Politeness first. Silence second. Consequences last. Many Americans later admit the biggest mistake they made was assuming kindness meant tolerance for disrespect. In Canada, those two things are very different. Kindness is offered freely, respect is required. There are countless follow-up stories where the same Americans return home and tell the story very differently than it actually happened. They'll say people were rude, that Canada was unfriendly. But when pressed, the details reveal something else. They ignored warnings, they crossed lines, they refused to adjust. Meanwhile, Canadians rarely talk about these incidents at all. To them, it wasn't dramatic, it was routine. Someone broke an unspoken rule, and the system corrected it quietly. And that's the part no one expects. Canada doesn't humiliate people with aggression. It humbles them with structure, with social norms that don't bend to ego, with a collective understanding that respect isn't negotiable. By the time Americans fully realize this, the moment has already passed. The room has moved on. Life continues. And they're left replaying the situation, wondering how everything slipped out of their control so quickly. Because in Canada, the loudest voice rarely wins. The calmest one does. And once you understand that, you understand why trying to bully Canadians almost always ends the same way.